fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. Mr. Joe Goldberg is in the house.
I'm here. I'm with you, Al.
Yeah.
Whatever you want me to do, I'm here for you.
Wow. Well, let's forget about the show then.
Yeah, here we go. That's awesome. That might take it. Take the wife.
Yeah. Let's just do it, man. You know.
I had no response. I set you up. You hit it out of the park, and I'm just watching it go.
Yeah. Speaking of hitting it out the park, now we're right across the water. I guess the pond, as they like to say, down in America. And let's see, we're going to talk to a writer. And he's got
that's a surprise.
Yeah. Well, no, but he's got quite a history. He's not just a writer. He's a talented dancer. And anyway, no. Yeah. So we're going to talk about his latest book, and it's book 2 in a series. And, of course, it's called How to Be Dead, and it's a Dr. Carolyn Harkin series. So, James Murphy, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Well, James, so here we go. Now, this is book 2. So, obviously, there was a book 1. I guess that's the Write Me a Murder. So let's talk about that. Where did this whole idea come from for you? Where did it start?
Well, I, like many crime fiction writers, suffer from a thing called imposter syndrome, which I'm sure you either have heard of before or maybe can relate to in some way. And I had previously written a detective series, and I wanted to do something a little bit different and a little bit darker, something a bit more psychological. And I had been teaching a crime fiction class in a almost in a local castle. It's not quite a castle now, but you're beside castle ruins, essentially, in the centre of, I suppose, a forest park. And every week when I was going to teach this class, because of my imposter syndrome, I used to go and have a walk around this, the beautiful old gardens. And in the centre of the gardens, there is a stone statue of a dog. And that dog is related to local folklore here. And there's some stories attached to it. And I got some ideas for a story about that. And then I went into the crime fiction writing class. And I'd given the delegates some tasks, some kind of little writing tasks. And as they were doing them, I was wandering around the room, and I suddenly had the thought, any one of these people could be a killer. And maybe they're just chronicling their diary, so to speak, rather than coming up with fiction. So I thought that would be a really great idea for a book, and it kind of all started from those two things starting to blend together a little bit. In my day job as a teacher, I worked with some quite young people with challenges. I think that's probably the best way of putting it, and challenges that have come through no fault of their own, in terms of how society has treated them. And I noticed a bit of a trend that some of those, in fact a lot of those young people, were really looking for male role models because they didn't have any in their lives. And they were looking to the internet, which is not obviously an ideal thing. And maybe finding male role models in places where maybe the last places you would want them to find them. So this all melded together for a story for me. And the idea was, the premise was that our central character, Dr. Carolyn Harkin, had been having a bit of a tough time, in fact, a very tough time in the hands of a stalker. And she returned back to her native Northern Ireland to try and rebuild her life. And as she was settling into Northern Ireland again, she was asked to take on a crime fiction writing class and deliver the class. What she found very quickly there was that there were two people who stood out within the group. One of them was a young woman who had asked her to look at a cold case of a missing person who she suspected was murdered. And the other was a man in the class who, in offering up his short snatches of fiction, was actually retelling Dr. Carolyn episodes from her earlier life. And we, as readers, are set up to wonder, well, how did he know that, and what's going on here, and why is this guy here? So essentially it was a cold case, and a bit of a kind of I suppose, a disturbing writing delegate that met Dr. Carolyn on her return. Right.
So the main character, Dr. Harkin, Carolyn Harkin, how did you get into writing a character like that? It's a female character, right?
Yes.
And so how do you get into that?
Well, I suppose the reason I kind of deliberately chose Dr. Harkin was because I wanted to challenge myself as a writer. So, as I mentioned earlier, I had previously written a detective series, and the protagonist there was male, and, it followed almost like a police procedural style. So I wanted to challenge myself in terms of the subgenre by going a bit darker and writing psychological thriller, but also challenge myself as a writer from the point of view of maybe writing from a female perspective. And because of some of the things that the novel was dealing with, like toxic masculinity and violence against women and girls and so on, I felt it was really important that that it was a female voice. And me not being female, obviously, it did prove difficult, but I had my wife actually as a really good sounding board, because some of the ideas behind the novel came through conversations that she and I had over a number of months, looking at true life events, crime events, things that had happened in the news and media and so on, and things that we could relate to our own lives. Through those conversations, I suddenly became aware that I viewed myself, as many of us do, as a nice guy, but actually I maybe had a bit to learn about how the world treats women, if that makes sense. So for example, if I were walking down the street, maybe dark or semi-dark, and there was a female coming the other way, it would never have occurred to me that she would be heightened in terms of fight or flight or something like that. That never occurred to me, but these conversations and things that were happening in the news suddenly made it actually very real, and people talking about the need for education in that area, particularly for males. So I thought that me portraying Dr. Carolyn dealing with these themes, but obviously through me as a male writer, I thought that was important. And I also thought that because I write crime fiction, I feel that there's a lot of responsibility comes with that, because you're dealing with the biggest, darkest themes all the time, and there's a danger that in some ways those can be glamorized and so on. So I wanted to make sure that I handled it sensitively, and I thought actually that using the vehicle of a crime fiction writing class, it was an innovative way to do that and create a kind of page-turning thriller as you were doing it, in the sense that the protagonist, so Dr. Carolyn, I suppose, was talking about things like tropes in crime fiction, and why it's always the dog walker who finds the body, and why it's always body in a forest, maybe partially clothed, if even. Talking about the sense that I suppose tropes only really become tropes because they're grounded in fact. So all these things kind of came together, and I mentioned earlier on about the statue of the dog, and the legend that goes behind that dog. It's called the Mazarine Hound, so it's an Irish wolfhound, and the story goes that Lady Marion Langford, when she was newly married, came to her husband's castle here in Antrim, where I'm sitting at the moment, and she was exploring the grounds of the castle, came under attack by a wolf, and out of nowhere this Irish wolfhound appeared, fought the wolf until the wolf died, and became her hero, and subsequently then saved her life several more times before passing on itself, and the dog itself actually passed on into folklore, or sorry, the statue itself passed into folklore because there was a legend around that as long as the statue remained intact and in one piece, then Antrim would be safe, and it would be under the protection of this dog still. So I kind of looked at that as firstly as a really nice story in itself, but also it kind of paralleled what I wanted to talk about, because there was this woman under attack who needed to be protected by the animal, but then had to adapt and so on herself. So I was kind of looking at the idea that not all wolves have four legs, so to speak.
So James, that leads me to the question regarding these themes. I mean, they're deliberate, right? You want people to get these messages out of your crime fiction writing.
Absolutely. Well, no,
yeah.
I mean, they were never. I didn't sit down and say, right, I want to write a novel about this. It all came about really just as the idea of one of these people in this class I was teaching possibly being a killer. So I was almost being flippant. But I spoke to some people in the publishing industry and thought, I think I have a really good idea for a book. And I talked to various contacts I had, and they said, yes, absolutely, that's a great premise. But what I found was that when I sat down to write it, yes, it was a great premise, but actually there wasn't really any story there. And I found it really difficult to write. So I suppose the idea was kind of percolating a little bit, and then obviously we had real life events here in the UK and Ireland where two young women were murdered in separate incidents. And, day and daily, in fact, still day and daily, we're hearing about the rise of the rise in occurrences of violence against women and girls. So that was kind of on my mind a lot through work and home. And I suppose the things just started to blend together to the sense that actually this novel isn't going to be difficult to write, because the premise and the things that are preoccupying me actually blend together quite well. So once that happened, once I had that kind of moment where I thought, yes, actually this works, Dr. Carolyn suddenly became fully formed, as did the storyline.
I don't usually ask this question, but since you've sort of changed from the crime fiction to this different one, more psychological crime fiction, and you have these themes underneath it, did you have an idea of who would read this book? Who would get the most out of this book, entertainment-wise? Man, women, old, young?
No, I mean, I know obviously crime fiction readers tend to be more female, within a certain demographic as well, in terms of age and so on. But to be honest, I didn't really sit down with that in mind either. It was mostly about me challenging myself as a writer and actually just exploring this new avenue that I wanted to go down, so to speak. So I did worry about readers, because I knew that obviously my detective series, it was very much police procedural, and it followed those kind of lines. And I did wonder, would my readers accept, so to speak, this new subgenre that I delved into? And I was very lucky in that regard, because a friend who is also a crime fiction writer had been funded to produce a short story anthology. And the idea with this short story anthology was a lot of Northern Irish crime fiction writers currently are also huge music fans and also big supporters of local music. So he had the idea that we should come together, produce an anthology based on songs or artists from Northern Ireland. And I picked the band Snow Patrol to write a story about. And I wasn't I liked the band, but I wouldn't have necessarily called myself a fan. But when I decided that I was going to use this band as the idea or the seed for the story, I looked on Apple Music Essentials, and I looked at their playlist. And about halfway down the list, there was a song called How to Be Dead. And of course I hit play and suddenly realised that was actually my favourite Snow Patrol song. So that became the seeds of the story. And the reason I mention that is because what I did for that was I involved Dr. Harkin and some of the other central characters that I was writing at the time in Write Me a Murder. and dabbled a little bit with the whole kind of psychological thriller within the short story, and obviously put that out. And thankfully for me, the anthology did really well, and the short story within it did particularly well. So that kind of gave me a green light to say that, well, actually the readership was there. But I didn't, I suppose to get back to the original question, I didn't have any idea who or, what I was aiming for.
Well, that being said, now that you've written, 2 books in this series, have you found that maybe a subtext or a meaning has come out of your writing, maybe organically as you write it? And now, is there some sort of message you hope readers take away?
I think the message is essentially that we do. Even into the new book, How to Be Dead, it is grounded very much in how society treats people and how society particularly treats women. I suppose the new book also deals with the idea of how we as a society actually consume crime fiction. It's obviously the most popular genre, across be it book, film, TV, streaming, and it's something we all talk about, and it's, it is often the topic around the water cooler, so to speak. And I really kind of wonder now, the more I write crime fiction and the more I think about it, do we need some kind of reset in terms of how we process it? Because, I think of recent conversations I've had or overheard where people are almost glamorizing or kind of dismissing serial killers. It was almost like, oh, well, they had a difficult childhood, or, they didn't come across as bad as all that. And even right down to how the media, if we look at the recent, I can't remember the guy's name, and you guys would probably know better, the recent CEO murder in New York.
Oh, the guy from Health.
United Healthcare.
United Health, yeah.
Yes, that's right. And the fact that obviously he is a convicted felon, but was getting marriage proposals from random people who, just because he didn't look like a killer, if that makes sense. Maybe he looked a bit more like a Hallmark actor. So that kind of got me thinking about that kind of message, so that does kind of, I suppose, filter through in the How to Be Dead book. And also how, certainly within the UK and Ireland, there's still a pandemic against women and girls in terms of violence. And there's also a bit of a pandemic in terms of institutional corruption, particularly around issues with violence against women and girls. So I think the message is probably relating back to my day job, so to speak, is that we need a lot of education, and I think we need a reset in many areas of our modern life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we know America needs a big reset.
Yeah, no kidding. Hey, James, how did you handle that in your writing? If there's and I agree with you totally. He lopped off his head and it doesn't feel bad about it, goes on to the next thing, and this is, the guy's you're a killer. So how did you handle that in your writing to, answer the fears you have?
I'm also very mindful of the fact that, people are sitting down to read something and enjoy it. And I want it to be a page turner, and I want it to be, something that they can't put down. And I think I've achieved that, and I suppose that's, first and foremost. I think just in how I portray things, I would like to get people thinking. So for example, in How to Be Dead, there is a lot about how television drama is put together and how it's edited together. So the idea in this one, part of the one of the subplots is that Dr. Harkin, with her background, she's obviously an investigative psychologist, but she's also a best-selling thriller writer. So one of the ideas I put into the novel was, well, let's have it that, some of her previous cases are turned into almost like a true life, a true crime drama. So something along the lines of Homicide Hunter, that kind of thing, where you would have Carolyn maybe talking over how she solved various cases. And then I had the idea that what we could do is have fictional crimes, so to speak, fictional cases that were acted out, and then ask Carolyn to respond to them. But what I did there was actually involve elements of her past again, but also the people in her present, and have them framed in a completely different way in how they act, or how the fictionalized version of them would act, as opposed to what she knew to be real, to the point where I think, I suppose, readers and even Carolyn herself at times was actually questioning, well, what's real and what's not real. And I think that's something that I wanted readers to take away. You know, that actually, yes, this was really entertaining. Yes, it was a thrilling read, but actually it does make me think, you know, how in future, how I react, or how I consume news, or, you know, how I question or not question things that are presented to me.
So, how does writing these fictions, how has that changed you as a writer?
That's a really good question. I haven't actually really thought of that.
That's why he gets paid the big bucks there, James.
Yeah, that's right.
I think I always was quite aware in terms of my writing reflecting what I'm living, if that makes sense. But it was always my subconscious. I think now I'm more, you know, if I get an idea for a story, I am kind of thinking about, well, what is that saying about me? What is that saying about the society around me as well? Before I actually, I suppose, put pen to paper now. So I think it's probably made me a bit more self-aware.
Hey, James, I want to ask a question, kind of off the actual writing style thing. Writing is a lonely business. And sometimes you mentioned you reach out to author friends and things like that. What's in the water in Ireland? That you got the Kinty, we talk to Irish authors every day of the week. You come from a lineage of Joyce and McCourt and Oscar Wilde. I mean, what is it in Ireland? There's just so much writing going on there, a community.
I think just in terms of tradition and history and heritage and all that sort of stuff, I think we've always been a nation of storytellers. And it's something that we enjoy. And I think we probably, I mean, if you look at your own life, virtually every interaction you have with any other person from you wake up until you go to bed again that night is a story of sorts. So I think Irish people are maybe just a wee bit more tuned into that. And, you know, that's how we've educated our young people. That's how we, you know, pass down our social history and all that sort of stuff. I mean, if you think even in terms of what I was saying about the legend of the Mazarine Hound that found its way into my writing, I mean, that literally is just a folklore story, but actually it still has resonance today because of what's going on in the world today. So I suppose we're just, well, it's in the blood. Does that, to put it short?
Yeah, but I think you said the key word, which I used to ask this question all the time back in the day, is being a storyteller. I mean, James, what makes a storyteller?
The hard questions are coming really thick and fast.
Yeah, Al's going to pay me a subsidy. But what makes a story? You want to entertain. What makes a storyteller? What's in the Irish blood that makes a storytellers?
I think being able to capture and hold the imagination of your audience, no matter their background, age, all of that stuff, and I suppose, you know, to engage them, to hold their attention, but also to get them thinking and to get them, I suppose, maybe wanting to express themselves and communicate their own stories. I think that's important. I mean, that's something that I've always encouraged, and I suppose that kind of leads back to I'm an educator by trade, so to speak. I mean, I've been a teacher now for almost 30 years, which I actually have just realised myself now. Wasn't yesterday.
How's that possible? You're only 28 years old.
No, exactly. No, I just looked for you, that's all.
So, do you ever think about why society and people in general are so obsessed with true crime, murder, crime fiction, and it's been that way for a long time. I mean, we've always rallied around, it seems like, gangsters and from Billy the Kid right through to modern day. What's wrong with us?
I was one of those people, and still am one of those people. And I think for me, the idea is that we like to, I suppose, look at, well, what is the worst thing that could happen. I think there's a sense of fear and a sense of danger in that we can't help being attracted to the idea of the macabre almost. And that it's, things like that, these true crime things, nobody could ever really be that evil. I mean, it's not, so there's an attraction in the sense that, this isn't everyday life, but also it is for somebody, if that makes sense. So there's the kind of, you're repulsed by it, but enchanted by it. So to me, I suppose the thing I would liken it to is, if you happen to be driving past maybe a road traffic accident, you shouldn't look, but you are inclined to rubberneck a little bit. I suppose I would equate our obsession with crime fiction as being a little bit like that. And I think it also relates back to what I was saying earlier on about storytelling, because, you're consuming that story and it is something, beyond the realms of normality a lot of the time. Can then have that experience of talking to someone else about it. What did you think of that last night, and so on. But I think what worries me now is that it's not really something now that is out of the ordinary, if that makes sense. Because we see and hear and are bombarded with news and images every day of increasingly depraved and sick and all sorts of stuff, that it just seems to be almost that the thing that used to scare us before and made us want to look before, much the way you would watch, like those kind of Halloween type films and so on for the jump and for the scare. Almost seems now like we're getting a little bit desensitized to it all because we see it so often. Right.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I agree. Well, so what do you got coming next? Like, what's going on now after you've got this book out, and are you working on another project?
I am. The book literally just came out last week, so I am in the throes of a book tour, actually. I know some people, when they talk about book tours, it's almost like a list of blogs, where they would have people writing about their book. For me, a book tour is very much about actually getting out and meeting readers. So I'm literally, especially this week, I'm all over the place, because I think it's important, particularly as a crime fiction writer, to stand out and actually make connections with your readers, because ultimately that's what makes you stand out. In a genre where, if we're honest about it, good crime fiction writers are probably 10 a penny. So I have that, but yes, I'm at the early stages now of the next Dr. Carolyn Harkin book. And I suppose the way I approach a novel is, I suppose I always use an analogy of kind of tailoring, that you're maybe thinking about making a jacket or a suit or something like that. So the way I kind of look at it is, I have the idea for a book, so that's almost like picking the material. I'm in the process now of looking at subplots and maybe some of the bigger themes. So I almost equate that to, finding the lining and the stitching and the buttons and all that sort of stuff. So it's different ideas kind of percolating in my mind. But essentially, the next stage of Dr. Harkin's life will be probably a little bit darker again. Where she will be maybe looking at the idea of the occult and demonology finding its way into her life, and maybe perhaps looking at the idea of, obviously she has a psychological background, she's trained in reading people's behaviour and so on, so maybe looking at that idea of, well, the devil made me do it kind of thing. So I'm exploring that at the moment, and that's involving a little bit of research, which is really interesting, because I do quite, again, like we were talking about earlier, I am maybe attracted a little bit to that kind of dark stuff that we shouldn't be going down that path. but you can't quite help, taking a peek, so to speak. So yeah, it's an early development at the moment, but that's where we're going next. And alongside that, my detective series, I had thought initially after 3 books that I was going to park that for a little while, but I didn't actually realise that while I had it parked and I was doing the Dr. Harkin stuff, it was quietly building a nice little following of readers who are now eagerly anticipating the next one of those. So I had an idea for one of those that involves, I don't know if you guys would be familiar with a charity called Project Children. It was a charity based here in Ireland in and around the 1980s, 1990s, where American, and I think Canadian, I'm not sure,
no, don't blame us.
Definitely American.
Yeah.
Families would have hosted young people from Northern Ireland to essentially give them a break from growing up in the Troubles. And I was one of those young people. I stayed in Port Clinton in Ohio for 6 weeks one summer, and I had an idea around that that again is also percolating. But that would be the detective series. So there's lots to be doing at the moment.
Yeah, sounds like it. Fantastic. Well, listen, so if you like to interact with readers, or if you like to have them do comments and stuff, do you do social media? Do you have a website? Where do people find James?
Yes, I have all of the above. So my website is www.jamesmurphywriter.org, and I'm across all the social pages as at James Murphy Books, and the books is just BKS.
Oh, okay. Well, fantastic. Now we're going to have all that up on our website as well, so people can find it easily along with your books. So, fantastic. We appreciate you being here. Our guest, James Murphy, his newest book, How to Be Dead. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, James.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.